Welcome, everyone, and thank you for being faithful and being here tonight for this third installment of our special leadership development session. This is number 3 so far. We've talked about personal leadership. Last week we talked about financial leadership. Next week we'll close out by talking about spiritual leadership. And this evening we're going to talk about relational leadership. So why don't we begin with a word of prayer. Our Father, our God, we thank you for this opportunity to be together and to go through some of these important areas of leadership. And we know, oh God, that you want us to treat people the way that you have prescribed in your word. And we know that that is a mark of true leadership that you endorse. And so we pray you bless our time together this evening. In Christ's name, amen. Relational leadership is extremely important. And there's good reason for that. Because if we can't treat people right, well then what good is our leadership? Think about it that way. If you can't treat people right, well, what good is people following you? One of the biggest disappointments is when a child who follows an athlete gets the opportunity to meet that athlete. And then, he might have a poster of that athlete on his wall. He might have a baseball trading card. He might even have his glove with his name in it. And then when he gets to the autograph table and he meets this person that he has idolized for all these years, he finds out that that person is not only ordinary, but they're a bum. And they're mean, they could care less to be there. And the only reason why that they're signing gloves and baseballs is because they're getting paid to be there. And once they reach that quota or that 2-hour limit, they're gone. And they're not going to sign any more after that. Well, why is that? Because lots of people are given the title of a leader, but they're really not a leader. And it gets back to because they don't value people. Real leaders value people because people matter to God, and so people should matter to all leaders. So this evening we're talking about relational leadership, and once again, this is an inward quality here. And so here's a couple of things to just start off with, more of an introduction. You'll notice this in your notes here. This is what I would call a definition of a relational leader. It is the ability to lead others effectively without sacrificing ethics or esteem. The ability to lead others without sacrificing ethics. In other words, I'm not going to be the type of a leader that's two different people. I'm going to be the same person you see and the same person behind closed doors. And a good relational leader has good ethics. Secondly, a good relational leader, they have a respect and esteem for other people. That's what that word esteem means. It means that you have a respect for other people. The minute a leader stops respecting the people he or she is leading is when their leadership is going to go off the table and off the chart, because they're not leading people the way that God has called them to lead. They need to lead in a way that is showing that they have a respect and they hold people in high esteem. The minute we stop respecting the people we lead, it shows. And so a good leader respects the people that they are leading, whether it be on the job, whether it be they're a teacher in a classroom, whether it be they're a foreman. When you stop respecting people, you know what happens? Eventually, they don't want to be committed anymore. No matter how talented a team may be, if the team loses their respect for their coach in that locker room, forget it. All hell could break loose in that locker room. I mean, we just saw it with the Super Bowl. There was a lot of discord in the locker room after that play call. Why is that? These guys just won the Super Bowl the previous year. Because at the end of the day, the idea is winning. And now if that coach loses the respect of the players, and it was interesting in the postgame, one of the commentators who's a former player said, what Pete Carroll needs to do is as soon as he gets in that locker room, he needs to own this. He needs to tell the players, that was my call, and I own this, and let's move on. And that's exactly what he did, because if he doesn't, his players, not only are they going to be disappointed, they're going to lose respect for him. And it's going to be very hard to start the next season. And so at the end of the day, respect is a very important area of leadership. So a good relational leader does not sacrifice their ethics or their esteem for others. You notice this as well in your notes. Good relational leader qualities show up in how you treat your friends, your foes, and your faith. Let's explain all three. If you're a good relational leader, well, you're going to have a way that you deal with people who you consider to be your friends, and they're going to know you for being an above-the-boards type of person. One of the biggest detriments to leadership is people go, well, they're not really the same person. they're a different person behind closed doors or when you get to know them. You don't want that to be the case with you. When people get up close with you, you want them to see that you are real. You're every bit of the person that they think you are from a distance. See, it's easy to impress people from a stage. But what about when people come close to you? Are you the real thing or are you a phony? The thing is that good relational leaders, that their leadership qualities show up with their friends. Here's another way to look at it. Good relational leader qualities show up with our foes. I mean, how do we respond to our contemporaries or our enemies or people that don't like us or people that stand against us? You know, do we attack people? Are we constantly on the defense? A good leader doesn't need to do that. A good leader knows what they've been called to do, whether it's to lead their organization, to lead their business, to lead other coworkers, whatever it may be, and they just keep on keeping on. They're not looking for everybody else's approval, and the qualities, their qualities as a leader even shows up in how they deal with people who are against them. And that is a great way to look at a relational leader, not only in just the people that like us. It's easy to get along with the people that like us. But how do you move the bus with people who disagree with you? How do you motivate people who aren't on the same page with you? How do you get along with people who ultimately stand in opposition to you? You know, a good relational leader has a way of being diplomatic. That's a very good quality for a leader to have, to be diplomatic. And then, of course, your faith. You know, being a Christian and being a leader is not two different things. God has called all Christians, all people, to be leaders for that matter. And so a good relational leader has a deep connection to their faith. And so this evening, that's where we're going. We're going to talk about how to be a good relational leader. Now, notice this in your notes. These are what I would call marks of a poor relational leader. Somebody who is not a good relational leader. So you don't want to have these, okay? Notice here, when the going gets tough, poor leaders cut corners. That's what a poor relational leader does. When the going gets tough, they cut corners. Because you know what? I got to survive, and it's all about me, and it's all about how I look, and it's all about my public persona. It's all about how people view me. And so I got to start cutting corners so I could start raising back up my quote-unquote public capital. People need to view me in a certain way, and I need to view me in a certain way because I get all of my confidence in life comes from what other people think. And so I need other people to think well of me. So I got to cut corners so I can be in position for people to like me and approve of me. Poor relational leaders, they're controlled by that. And so they will cut corners morally. They'll cut corners financially. They'll cut corners any way they can. Secondly, when the going gets tough, poor leaders cut others. They throw other people as quick as they can down. They will cut other people's reputation down. They'll get their sword out. They'll commit verbal arsenics. You know, they'll throw up all over everybody else. Why? Because that's what a poor relational leader does. Somebody attacks me, I got to go attack them. In fact, some poor relational leaders, that's their whole message, is attacking other people. And whether this is in a marriage or this is on a political stage or anything else, this seems to be a very unwise approach to leading anything. I mean, you can't even lead a lemonade stand acting like this. And so, poor relational leaders cut other people. They cut other people down. Some people, because of their own insecurity, and they could be somebody of a very high affluent status. I was just talking with one of my accountability partners recently, and they were talking with me about somebody in their company who now, by the way, is the CEO of the company, who makes a very good living, very affluent. And this person, still advanced in age and has been on the job for over 3 decades, still finds it necessary to cut other co-workers down. And why does that person act like a child? You would think, well, haven't they arrived in life? They have this position, they have this, they have that. Well, still, you never, if you're not careful, you could fall into this no matter how young or old you are. Poor leaders cut others down. And then the third mark of a poor relational leader, when the going gets tough, the poor leaders cut God out. That's what they do. They cut God out. Everybody, listen, there are no atheists in foxholes. And when people want a position or they want this, they want that, everybody throws a prayer up. I have received from people, and again, I love praying with people, but so many times I've prayed with people because they want to get this job promotion, they want to get this, but they don't want to give what they get from the Lord as a result of that promotion. Lord, help me do this, and Lord, help me do that. And then we forget God. We cut God out. Well, that's what poor relational leaders do. They cut God out. Once they get what they want from God, we cut God out. We can't cut God out. And when the going gets tough, we don't want to cut any of these areas. We don't want to cut corners. We don't want to cut people. We don't want to cut God. Now, people who are rich with relational leadership skills, this is marks of their character. These are leaders who always do what is right even when nobody else is looking. Even when nobody else is looking. Again, a poor relational leader will cut corners when the going gets tough, and they'll cut corners even when things aren't going so bad, because it's all about them, it's all about looking good, it's all about getting, it's all about moving forward, even if you got to step on other people. But somebody who's rich in relational leadership, they're always doing what is right, even when nobody's looking. A big reason of that is that they want to do what's right to please God ultimately. That's at the heart of it. Kind of like Joseph in Genesis 39 when he was propositioned to have that affair. Joseph was in a strong position of leadership, wasn't he? He was in charge of Potiphar's house. Potiphar was a very powerful man. There was nothing that Potiphar had, other than the wife, of course, that wasn't within Joseph's reach. And then you know the story well. Potiphar's wife propositioned Joseph, come to bed with me. She kept going after him. She took her eyes upon him, showed that he was young and handsome and everything like that. And Joseph said, no, I can't do this against God or my master. And even when nobody else was looking, because she sent everybody out, he refused to do the wrong thing. Well, a good relational leader thinks like that. Secondly, good relational leaders refuse to throw others under the bus. A good relational leader will hold their tongue. They will not commit a crime against somebody else's character, even if somebody else has it coming to them. They will hold their tongue because they know what it says in the book of James, the epistle of James. That the tongue could set everything on fire. The tongue could destroy. And the Bible also says in that same chapter, in James chapter 3, verse 10 through 12, blessing and cursing can't come out of the same mouth, James said. Brothers, he said, let it not be so. And so a good leader doesn't throw other people under the bus. Now, you probably know some people with poor relational leadership skills in your life. You know, they might be in church singing, how great thou art, and then throwing everybody under the bus the rest of the week, right? We've all even done that too at our, one time or another. But as you're building these good relational leadership skills up, you want to hold your tongue in your anger. One of the great disciplines of a good leader ultimately is the ability to control your temper. All of us have a temper. You don't just have to be Italian to have a temper. Anybody has a temper. It just depends on how it comes out. Some of the shyest people sometimes have the biggest bite. I've noticed that. And so we could all find ourselves into the area of cutting others if we're not careful. If you want to be a really great leader for God, a great leader on the job, you want to be somebody who refuses to throw others under the bus. And then thirdly, leaders have a dependence on God. This is very important because as you depend on God, you're going to be convicted by God to treat people the right way. I've noticed that in my own life. There's a lot of times I want to treat people the way I want to treat them. Could I just be honest with you? There's a lot of times I want to hit somebody. You see things going on in the parking lot sometimes, how people are. Sometimes you just want to take your car and just ram it. I wish I had an old car, something like a beat-up car with no license plates. Just ram into a few people once in a while in their car and then just flee the scene. Again, I'm not going to do that. These are things that go through your mind. Go through my mind. Maybe not through. Maybe you're more holier than I am. I don't know. Lots of things go through my mind. But you know what? I can't act on those things. I got to take every thought captive under Jesus Christ, the Scripture says. And a good relational leader is growing in these areas. And the more you depend on God, you're going to be human. You're going to have these inclinations and thoughts to say this and do that. Have you ever you ever practiced how you're going to tell somebody off? Imagine somebody looked in on your window watching you talk to yourself. They think you're crazy. We go through the whole thing, how we're going to do it. Again, as you depend on God, it restricts that. And you don't go, you know what, I'm not going to do that. If I do that, I'm going to perpetuate the problem. And you know what, if I do this, this is going to happen. A soft answer turns away wrath. And all of a sudden, the Scripture and God's Holy Spirit gets control of you. That's why you probably never want to press send on an email that you're going to send in retaliation or response to something you didn't like, or a text message, because you can't get that back. And a lot of times, we press send very quickly in our mouth, and we can't get that back. That's one of the problems with words. Once they go out, you can't get them back, no matter how hard you try. So a good person in their relational leadership, who's rich in relational leadership, they depend on God, and that itself provides a deterrent from verbally throwing up on people. And so these are good things to keep in mind. That's the mark of somebody who's rich, who's flourishing, who's wealthy in relational leadership. And if you're going to be an effective leader, it has everything to do with being a relational leader. And I know what some people think, well, if you're going to be a good leader, you got to be a great orator. No. I mean, today, a lot of people go, oh, this politician speaks this way, and this politician speaks that way. First of all, they're reading a speech that somebody else wrote. And then on the national level, not only that, they don't have it memorized, they're reading off a teleprompter. Take the teleprompter away, and then we really see how good of an orator they are. Very few people actually have the ability to talk off their notes or have no notes in front of them. Very few of our leaders do, unfortunately. And then the ones that do, they're just going, they don't even know what they're saying half the time. A good leader has nothing to do with talking. It has everything to do with how you treat people. We have to keep that in mind. They might say, Ray, where do you get that from? Well, I'm going to come back to the quote, but I want you to write this down. The greatest relational leader had a speech problem. Did you know that? The greatest relational leader had some type, we don't know exactly what it was, he had some type of disability when it came to speaking. And that's Moses. He was, not only that, he was also tongue-tied in the sense that he was afraid. So he had this battle with God. He gave God 5 different excuses. It's one of my favorite messages I did on Moses' excuses. And his last one, God basically, all right, just get your brother, let's just get Aaron in here. And so Aaron, quote unquote, was the mouthpiece. Moses was the representative. But Moses had an insecurity when it came to his speech. And so that just blows out the water all of these surface areas of leadership that people want to hold. You got to be a charismatic this, and you got to be a great this and a great that. But you know what? Nobody ever talks about how you treat people. Now, once in a while, you get somebody that maybe is their total package, and they could talk right, they listen, they're competent, they're humble, and praise God. Hopefully, all of us, by the grace of God, is working towards being that. But nobody is any of those things all in one on their own. It has to be God empowering them. He has to do it. I've told you before, I'm very upfront with it. It's by God's grace. I testify to it today. I know some of my friends might watch this. I don't know. Sometimes I wonder how I passed my undergraduate and seminary and Hebrew and Greek. I don't know how that happened. That's a miracle of God. I'm an average student at best. Some people, they could just walk in there and take the test. It was very hard for me. So I know full well that God is in the business of doing extraordinary things through less than ordinary people. You just got to watch out for the people that toot their own horn all the time and think they're all that in a bag of potato chips, because they're probably a stale bag of potato chips is what they are. So notice these 3 things here under Moses' leadership and why we're going to pick him out tonight as that great relational leader. First of all, he trusted God for an unprecedented mission. He trusted God for an unprecedented mission to lead the people out of captivity. Now, you might say, how did they get there in the first place? Now, go all the way back to Joseph. Joseph was basically the prime minister of Egypt. And his brothers, those good-for-nothing brothers and them, they made up at the end of the book of Genesis. You remember that? And then they all moved there and their families, and they began to grow in population. As you go from Genesis to Exodus, a very telling statement is made in the beginning of Exodus. And the new Pharaoh, he forgot who Joseph was. That's a problem if you're an Israelite. Because as the Israelites grew in number, what did the new Pharaoh in office want to do? Well, he wanted to put them into slavery because they were growing in number. He said, what if a war breaks out? They'll easily overtake us. And then you had all of those years of slavery. Now Moses is born. And here comes this amazing leader who steps on the scene. And as you know the story, God gives him this mission to lead the people out of captivity, an unprecedented mission. Next, he represented God before Pharaoh. Now that's pretty amazing. He was going to be him and Aaron were going to be God's representatives before Pharaoh. It took a lot of faith and a lot of courage to stand before a man who could execute you if he wanted to. Not only that, Moses' popularity among Pharaoh and his court was at an all-time low, considering how he took off after he killed an Egyptian. So it wasn't exactly the most popular guy in the room, in the court. And then he managed the complaining Israelites. Now, how many of you know people in your own family who complain? Oh my gosh. You know, people who complain, I'm going to do a whole teaching series on complaining. People who complain are annoying after a while, right? I mean, just have, stop belly aching all the time. Do you realize that poor Moses had to listen to the Israelites complain? We don't have any water. We don't have any food. And I mean, they were complete whining all the time. That alone give him an award for dealing with that. After he leads them through the Red Sea. And I remember they were complaining that they missed the smell of garlic, for crying out loud. I mean, it's ridiculous. These people are crazy. But yet through all of that, he was God's man to treat people fairly. And I think you look at him and you go, that's a relational leader that we put our focus on. And we put our focus on him because a lot of times we think, well, when I'm a leader, I got to get everybody to pitch in. Well, before you get everybody to pitch in, take notice of this quote here from Maxwell. Before you can ask for someone's hand, you need to first have their heart. That's very important. Before you can ask for somebody's hand, you got to have their heart. I think that's true in marriage. You can't twist somebody's arm and say, just meet me at the altar, and that's it. You kind of got to have their heart first. And the same thing is true in leadership. You have to gain people's trust. It takes time. You have to gain people's love and appreciation. That takes time. And so Moses is a great example of this. And God used him greatly. And I believe God could use you greatly in your home, in your job, and in the church. In those three areas, you want to excel in your leadership. And here's how to do it. Let's talk about how to be a good relational leader tonight. And let's pinpoint how to exactly do that. And so write this first one down. Good relational leaders are transparent. Very important to keep that in mind. This cannot be overstated. Good relational leaders are transparent. In fact, at the top of our discussion this evening, we already talked about ethics and esteeming others. I mean, if you have poor ethics, well, that's going to show. Because you remember what a transparency was before you had overhead projectors and all those types of things? You had a transparency machine. And they would take information on what would be by an 8.5 by 11 sheet, say, but it was transparent. You would put it down and it would project onto the screen. And what was on that paper was what would be on that screen. Remember those things? Now, could that be said of us? Is what's in our heart, is that reflected in how we treat people, and vice versa? Or are we two different people? Good relational leaders are transparent. You could see right through them. What you see is what you get. And you could see that in Moses and how his discourse with God went when God told him, God voluntells people. He voluntells people what to do. Okay, keep that in mind. And this is here. Look at this exchange here. Just look at Moses' transparency. After God told him what he was going to do, Moses then said to the Lord, "Pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent." So, I've never been asked to read the kids a good night story or anything like that. Neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. So, God, that about covers it. I've really never been eloquent in speech. And I am slow to speech and tongue. So that kind of leads us to believe that he potentially had some type of lacking or disability. We don't know for sure. But nevertheless, there was an insecurity in the way he spoke. But the fact that he would bring that before God shows his transparency. It also shows his smarts. God's not stupid. God sees everything. But you just see, sometimes we think that we need to impress God and impress others. And we don't need to do that. We don't need to focus on impressing people. That's the last thing we got to do. We got to focus on being transparent. And I think one of the ways, you might want to just write this note on the side because it's not in your notes. One of the ways to be transparent is to be in touch with your weaknesses. I don't got no weaknesses. Weakness number one, you're prideful. There you go. You could write that down. You do have weaknesses. Now, one of your weaknesses and one of my weaknesses might be that I don't listen to people. In our staff meeting, I read something briefly about how Jesus, in order to connect with people, the first thing he did was he used his ears. That's what he did. Imagine that. The Savior of the world. He used his ears when he was going to connect with people before he would speak. I mean, I think that's very important to keep that in mind. A lot of times we don't listen enough to people. Before they could get the answer out, hey, how you doing? We've already said that's good. And they could have said, I'm about to drop dead, and we've already said that's good. Sometimes we're talking with people, and then they go to talk, and we're thinking about what our response is going to be. That might be a weakness right now. And that's going to prohibit you from being the leader that God's called you. But in order to be transparent, you got to look at your weaknesses. And if you can identify your weaknesses, you got to work on your weaknesses. You got to sharpen your strengths, and you got to work on your weaknesses. So that's a good way to be transparent. Another thing in the area of transparency, and you'll notice these now in these helpful guidelines, cure the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde syndrome. You don't want to be two different people. Very important. Next, get accountability. It's good to have somebody else who's behind you to encourage you and push you on to do the right thing. It's good to have somebody in your life who's not going to tell you what you always want to hear. Sometimes you need to hear the facts about what's going on in your life, your character. And then seek to please God. You want to make that one of the objects of your leadership, and no matter what area of leadership you are in, you want to seek to please God always. That has to be a big thing in your life. Because as you do that, well, that's going to produce integrity in your life and consistency. In fact, look at this next quote here. A leader develops followers' trust by his or her own consistency and integrity. You gain people's trust very quickly when you have a consistency to your character and an integrity. But nothing bankrupts your transparency faster than not being consistent and not having integrity. Does that make sense? And so a good relational leader, if they're going to lead other people and they're going to treat other people the way that God wants to treat them, well, they're going to be transparent and they're going to build up this account of trust. You know, I like to tell people in sometimes marriage counseling is you got to build up the account of trust. Now, I know because a lot of times I have to withdraw from my bank account of trust with Jen. But if I don't have that trust, well then, you know, being able to do this or be able to do, I'm going to go here, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, you know, well, then how should you be able to trust me if there's nothing in the account to trust me with? And so there has to be a consistency to how I'm treating my wife. There has to be a consistency to how I treat my friends, how I treat the people in the church, and so forth and on. Same thing if you're at work, how you treat your employer or employee. There has to be this account of trust that's there. For some reason, people think once they get to a certain level of position that they don't need to keep depositing in that account of trust. That is a big mistake. You want to continually be depositing trust into your account. And that is a great way to remain a transparent leader. Take this next quote into context here, written by the great preacher Charles Spurgeon. A man's life is always more forcible than his speech. When men take stock of him, they reckon his deeds as dollars and his words as pennies. If his life and doctrine disagree, the mass of onlookers accept his practice and reject his preaching. I think that says it all right there. There needs to be a transparency to how we operate. Good relational leaders are transparent. Number two, good relational leaders are trustworthy. Good relational leaders are trustworthy. This past Sunday, we were looking at the 5 boundaries that Jethro gave to his son-in-law Moses. And one of the last boundaries that we talked about, which ultimately was the boundary of support, that Moses had to go find for himself men that were like him. Moses was trustworthy. And so Jethro wasn't telling Moses that you needed to step down from hearing everybody's complaints and disputes because you're not trustworthy, but because you have other things to do and you're going to burn yourself out. Therefore, Moses, go find other people who are like you. Jethro's wisdom here, Exodus 18:21. But select capable men. We just had this verse Sunday. From all people, men who fear God, and guess what? Who are what? Trustworthy. Men who are trustworthy. Men who hate dishonest gain. Don't pick people who are getting over on people. Don't pick people who are cutting others up and cutting corners. No. And appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. So this was to be the focus of Moses. Go pick people who are what? Who are like you. Because you're trustworthy. Because we need trustworthy people to lead people. We don't need people who are not trustworthy. They should actually, they have all these caucuses when the national election comes along. They should have like a character caucus. You should have to go through a litmus test of your character in order to run for any position. I don't care if you're running for hall monitor. There should be a character trustworthy test that's given. And let the American people or the New York people or whoever people, let people see, okay, this person's trustworthy. They're not going to appoint their gay lover into a position of national security in New Jersey. They're not going to do that because they're trustworthy. Or they're not going to take funds and bring this one and that one in for immoral favors because they're trustworthy. There's a track record. And let that be something that's governed for any position. We need trustworthiness. We need trustworthy people to lead people. And it also should be done with teachers. I hear too many sick stories on the elementary level around the country of teachers, on the kindergarten level of teachers leading our kids, and the things that they want to push in front of them at such a young age. Things of debauchery, things of complete deviancy, fictitious practices, evilness at a young age. And so, whether you have children of your own or children in your family, you're very protective of your children and your family. And I think there needs to be a trustworthy character test that's given to anybody who has any position of leadership. Let them fill out a simple questionnaire, and let's give in references. And it's extremely important that we are trustworthy. Now, why is that? Because if you could be trustworthy and have a trustworthy character, you're going to be a trustworthy leader with responsibilities. I'm not just saying just be a good little boy and girl and be stupid. No. If you're going to be trustworthy, well, then we're assuming that you're going to put the time in and you're going to be a competent leader. We've talked about that before, that you need to be a competent leader. Competency is important. Well, you're not going to be competent if you're not trustworthy, because if you're not trustworthy, you're going to be lazy and things are going to slip. But if you are trustworthy, you're going to put your time in. You're not just going to coast. You're not going to go by the seam of your pants. You're going to work hard for the goal of winning and being successful, and that gets back to being a trustworthy person. And a trustworthy person knows that the buck stops with them. A trustworthy person carries the ball. A trustworthy person steps to the plate. I like this Maxwell quote: a leader can give up anything except final responsibility. A leader can give up anything except final responsibility. And again, that gets back to being someone who's credible, someone who's trustworthy, someone who's responsible. And a good relational leader is all of that. Moses was that. And that's why Jethro said, go find somebody like yourself to go do this. Only free yourself up. Number 3, good relational leaders are teachable. Good relational leaders are teachable. The minute we think we've learned it all, we've entered into the maze of pride. Let me tell you about the maze of pride. I've been there a few times. It's hard to get out. When you're in the maze of pride, it's very hard to find your way through because you get in there and you start thinking you're this and you're that. You have to be very careful to ever think you've arrived spiritually or relation or anything. You want to constantly be in this understanding that God is still working on me. He's still working on me. No matter what level of the success you even get to, there's still more. There's still more mountains to climb. You got to keep thinking like that. There's still more things to pray about. You got to keep thinking like that. Also, when you're able to be teachable, when you climb the mountain, you're going to be able to be teachable when you're in the valley. See, there are valleys between mountains. Now, I don't know about you. I wish my valleys were a lot shorter than my mountain experiences. Some of you know what I'm talking about. Maybe you're in a valley right now, or you're starting to climb up out of the valley. But what sustains you when you're in the valley? Well, what sustains you is the fact that you were a teachable person when you were on top of the mountain. That didn't leave you. And because when you're in that valley, you remain hungry, you remain humble, and you kept going. You didn't give up. Well, why was that? Because you were teachable and you kept learning when you had. There's going to be times when you have and you don't have. But you really see the test of somebody and what they're made of when they're in the valley. Listen, everybody's great when they're on top of the mountain. But what about when you're in the valley? Well, Moses not only was in the valley, he was in the wilderness with the people. And he had a million or 2 million complaining people, but Moses was teachable. Now, I love what Numbers 12:3 says. Imagine this being said of you in the Bible. Now, Moses was a very humble man, more humble than anyone else on the face of the earth. That's an amazing statement. And I like to pair this in the New Testament with John the Baptist. Jesus said there was never a man greater. I mean, that's incredible to have those statements made of yourself. And so Moses was considered the most humble man on the face of the earth. That's the Bible's commentary. That's remarkable. What does it mean to be humble as you study this word in the Hebrew language? It means to be teachable. Moses was the most teachable man on the face of the earth. And again, Moses, this is the man who communicated with God directly. This is the man who parted the Red Sea. This is the man who struck fear in Pharaoh. I mean, think about this. If there's anybody who should have been prideful, I guess it could have been Moses. It's Charlton Heston, for crying out loud. I mean, think about that. But he's teachable. He's teachable. How many have heard of the great coach John Wooden? And a believer also. This is what Coach Wooden said. It's what you learn after you know it all that counts. Isn't that a good one? It's after you learn it all. I mean, think about that. You never stop growing as a leader. Here are some helpful guidelines here. Decide to grow beyond your goals. So you might have a goal at an income level or a position level. You got to right now decide that I'm going to grow beyond that goal. That goal is not the end all for me. That goal is a milepost for me to give thanks to God for, to be thankful to whoever helped me get there, but I'm going to keep going. See, a lot of people, and a Christian should never think this way, because our goal is not the gold watch or the retirement party or whatever else you call success. Heaven, that's where we call home. We're just passing through here. So no matter how long we have on this earth, technically we never retire from God, no matter what we do. In fact, some people start having more fun after they retire because maybe they're able to give more of their time to the Lord. But good relational leaders, they're teachable and they realize that goals and positions, that's not the end of it. I'm going to keep going. And a lot of times as you get older, you realize that your goals need to be Christ-centered goals. Next, surrender pride. Very important. We gave a little bit of attention to that on the front end, so I'll move on. And then I like this understanding, and I got this from a Maxwell book. I'm not smart enough to come up with this. Never pay twice for the same mistake. Never pay twice for the same mistake. And then check out this Teddy Roosevelt quote. he who makes no mistakes makes no progress. You're going to make mistakes in this life, but make progress from them. There's going to be mistakes. You're going to fall, but fall forward. When we fall, well, we got to lick it up and we got to give it to God. If we sin, well, same thing, we got to give it to God. If we make a mistake in business, well, we got to learn from it. Sharpen our axe. You know, a lot of people that I've met, and again, this is where I have to be very clear on this, is that I'm not just saying, you know what, just pray about everything and read your Bible and you'll be a great leader. Go home, good night. No. That's not even what Jesus. Jesus put the disciples, he literally threw the disciples in the water. He sent the disciples out. You got to be competent. He gave them a 3.5-year training program, for crying out loud. Even Paul, before he went out, was in training for 3 years. There has to be a building of competence. There has to be a learning process that goes on in any area. So now when you're in the fire and you make mistakes, you got to learn from them. Don't make the same mistake twice. Learn from it. Study it. Get strong in it. And you'll make progress. Mistakes sometimes will bring you more closer to your goal than anything else. When you make a mistake and you fall flat on your face, you're able to have that aha moment. Now, being a big Giant fan, one of my favorite coaches, of course, was Bill Parcells. Well, he still is one of my favorite coaches. Lots of reasons. He could get in there and overturn a program, and he's one of the last great coaches to know actually how to draft players and see talent. He would draft guys in the 6th and 7th round, and they wind up being starters and key contributors on special teams. And I watched a special on Parcells about 2 years ago. And he talked about how before they won that first Super Bowl, if you remember the Chicago Bears, they had a good run themselves. And Chicago had whooped the Giants in the playoffs. And Parcells was on the plane ride home back to the Meadowlands, to New Jersey. And he just couldn't figure out how do we beat these guys, And one of his mentors basically told him, you got to go after it, and you got to learn from this. And he said it kind of just snapped his neck like a horse, just snapped him right into place. And the next year they went on to win the Super Bowl that year. And you got to remember when those years the Giants were playing, had to go against not only the Chicago Bears but the 49ers. Who were a juggernaut as well. And you have to have that moment when you face your failure, you face your defeat in order to go forward. You kind of got to snap your neck back in the plate. Okay, we're going to go forward. But if all we ever do is lick our wounds and we don't learn from them, we blame this one and blame that one. Blaming others is not being teachable. Owning it and being able to move forward, well, that's going to be progress. And you're going to build a champion within yourself. See, lots of people in ministry talk about, you're going to build the champion in you. I remember when I went to seminary, the school I went to, that was one of their slogans, building champions. The whole thing about, in order to build a champion, first you got to find the loser in you. That's really how it works. In fact, at training camps, I played football for a few years. At training camp, now I never made it to the pros, of course, but even on the lower levels, and then being able to go to a Division I school and hanging out with the team. Let me tell you something. The coaches beat the loser out of you. That's the whole point of these training camps, these 3-a-days. Why? Because they're letting you be able to come to the end of yourself as a man. Moses came to the end of himself a long time ago. And perhaps God was allowing that wilderness experience for the rest of the Israelites to do the same. And you will learn your greatest lessons from the Lord when you're in your valley. And it's when you're in that valley, boy, you take inventory of things. And you get a deeper appreciation for things. And that's really the real value of a man or a woman. And your relational leadership skills, I believe, are really born there. But Moses had that. Let's look at our last one before we close this evening. Of course, I wouldn't let you get out of here tonight without this one. Good relational leaders treat others right. Good relational leaders treat others right. I think it is a contradiction of terms for someone to call themselves a leader and treat people like garbage, in my opinion. Again, there's many contributing reasons to why we don't treat people right. Our upbringing. We may have, the only thing we know is to treat people rudely or to be disrespectful. That might be the only thing we know, how we interact with people. Well, we got to grow from that. Maybe it was a past experience we had with other people. We got burned. You know, I always joke, people will, when they come to the church, because this is, you know, my area of leadership is the church. It's about the only thing I know how to do. So people come to me and they go, oh, I don't want to get too involved because at my last church this happened. Or I don't want to do this because at my last church. He said, imagine if I applied that same philosophy. Well, the last member I had, they gave this. I wish you would give this. And the last member I had did this. I wish you would do that. People go, well, that pastor, he's kind of shallow. And it's kind of shallow for us to have that mentality. We can't base everything on how it used to be and this happened, that happened. We got to constantly be growing. We got to be moving forward. We got to put it in full-wheel drive. You know, yesterday in front of my house, because I'm at the end of the block, if anybody ever wants to go ice skating, just come to my house during February. I've put out the caution tape like I do every February, and I put my sign out. Sidewalk is closed. We'll see you at Easter. I have to put that sign out, you know, so nobody trips. And the poor mailman, he's got to come up. And here's the thing here. When it comes to our overall relational skills, when it comes to how we are with other people, when it comes to how we treat people, getting back to what we said earlier, we need to be consistent in season and out of season. And that means we have to be willing to be teachable and to grow past our weaknesses. And so, in order to treat others right, we need to be able to do that. We need to say, I'm not going to do it how it used to be. I'm going to grow from that. I'm going to learn from that. And I'm going to be better towards other people. I'm not going to be short with people. I'm not going to be long with people. I mean, there's all different ways to look at this, but I'm going to treat others right. Now, on Sunday, we talked a little bit about this. We called it, we went into talking about boundaries on relationships. And we talked about treating others right like Jesus. And so a good thing for a Christian to actually do is actually reflect Jesus. Imagine that. Isn't that a novelty idea? Treat other people like Jesus did. Refusing to judge people in a wrong way. Loving people, forgiving people. You know, for some reason, we always want blood in our culture. We've been offended. We want blood. We want their head on a platter. We've got to have a meeting all the time. Nobody can ever act graceful to anybody. Can never let something, okay, you know what, I'm going to pray for this person and let it go. Now, some things do need to be talked about. We understand that. But we want to treat others right. There's a way to do that. There's a way to do that. Now, returning to Moses, he's our example this evening. And look what it says here in Matthew 7:12. Now, this is known as the Golden Rule. You remember the Golden Rule, right? Also do for other people everything you want them to do for you. That is the meaning of Moses' teaching and the prophets. Imagine that's in the New Testament. Here's Moses again as our example of relational leadership, even in the New Testament. Now, in your translation, it might say the law. The law is what? What Moses wrote, the first 5 books of the Bible. So, Moses' teaching. Good relational leaders treat others right. That there's a way that they conduct themselves in such a way that they're always going above and beyond, that they don't take a day off in this area. You know, returning again to our national political scene, sometimes the mic will be on after the talk is over or the interview's over, and then they'll say, they caught so-and-so off mic saying this. And then the person will have to recant it, and they'll try to spin it 6 ways Sunday on how they didn't mean it this way and they didn't mean it that way. No, that's exactly what you meant, because your mic was on and you didn't know it. That's what we need to see. You know, we got to be the same person when the mic's on and when the mic's off. Very important. And that gets back to, okay, we're following the teachings of God, the teachings of Moses. Moses was an example of this. I want to treat others right. And so a couple of ways to do this is you want to guard your reactions and how you treat people. People are going to wrong you. Well, how am I responding to that situation? Another thing is I'm going to treat others right, is that I'm going to be, you have to almost check this off as a guarantee. I'm going to come in contact with people who are annoying, who waste my time, and who really turn my stomach too. But a good relational leader is consistent in how they treat the person they like and the person they know doesn't like them. Now you could say, Ray, you know what? I ended 2 minutes ago. I'm not gonna follow the rest of that tonight. That's your choice. You don't have to. It's up to you. Take it or leave it. I mean, you could throw this out in the garbage on the way out. That's up to you. I'm not gonna be offended by that. How could I be? I just talked about treating others right. I got to forgive you. So I can't be mad at you. But here's the thing: if you want to be an exceptional leader, an exceptional leader has a consistency, as we said at the top of tonight's lesson, not only how they treat their friends, but how they treat their foes. And so good relational leaders apply this. Good relational leaders go the extra mile. Good relational leaders turn the other cheek. Good relational leaders don't repay evil with evil, but they overcome evil with good, as much as it depends on you. Now, there might be a time when you got to call somebody on the carpet. There might be a time where you have to have a mediator. Absolutely. We understand all of that. There's appropriate times for that. But at the end of the day, good relational leaders treat others right. The last thing they do is reflect the craziness of this world. And so, this last quote for you. Christian maturity shows up in how you treat people. A lot of people think, I've been in the Lord for this many years, but they're gossiping about everybody. I find that comical. I've come across people like that. Through the years, you hear people that, when somebody starts off the first 5 minutes of their conversation with telling you how many years they've gone to church and how many years they're a Christian and all the things they've done, watch out. You might be looking at one of the biggest hypocrites you've ever seen. Be careful. Even if they have all the spiritual language. Nobody needs to give a resume. That's the resume. Resume speaks for itself. That's it. We don't need to advertise who we are and everything we've done or anything like that. We don't need to do that. We want to fly under the radar. God's servants, we'll talk about this next week with spiritual leadership, but God's servants make it their business to fly under the radar. They're not looking not raising their hand to get noticed all the time. The problem with people always looking to get noticed is they don't treat people right. And so, again, we got to make sure that we have a rein on our mouth and a rein on our heart, because that all gets back to treating people. Christian maturity shows up in how we treat people. Maturity has nothing to do with how people think how perfect, how good you are. It has nothing to do with that. Christian maturity shows up in how you treat people. And if you could treat people right the way that Christ did, that is an indication that you are healthy on the inside and your relationship with God is where it needs to be. And so those two things go hand in hand. Your behavior and how you treat other people is an indication that you really believe what you say you believe. And so this is an area we can all grow in. And so a little bit of homework as we close tonight is to go home and ask God, in these 4 areas, where is there improvement that needs to be made in my own character? How can I be a better leader? Do I need to be, is there a transparency issue? Is there a teachability issue? Is there a treating others right issue? Is there a trustworthiness issue? Show me, God. Be like David in the Psalms when he came before and he said, God, search me. Ask God to search your heart. And look no further than Moses here, when Moses was considered to be the most humble man, the most teachable man. Let that be said of us, that we're going to be a teachable people. Now, we're going to break up into our groups right now, and I have one question for us to go through tonight, and you'll see that right here on the screen. It's not in your notes, so you can write this on the back of sheet number 2 that you have. And it's just one question, but it's a lengthy one, so I'm just going to go through one tonight. I'll read the question, and then we'll break up into our groups and come back in 15 minutes, as we're right at the 8:30 mark, right on time. Using the points that were given as a reference, that means the 4 points that we went through, which as a review, transparency, trustworthiness, being teachable, and treating others right. So using those 4 points as a reference, please list additional qualities of a relational leader. So for example, for trustworthiness, you might want to attach to that responsible. credibility. So go use those as a launch pad and just, put more flesh on the bones here of, okay, this is what it means to be a relational leader. Okay, servant. I mean, throw all those words in there. Give additional words, and if you don't mind, for every quality you give, I told you it's going to be it's like really several questions in one. For every quality you give a little bit of a definition for it. A quick, no more than a sentence, by the way. It can't be here all night. But one word, and then a little definition of it. And then we'll come back and we'll compare notes together. So let's break up and do that. We'll take a few minutes, and I'll leave the question on the screen so we can see it. So break up into groups, and then we'll come back and discuss it together.